As it has it. The dream of creating a photo book, some sort of collection of your own images, which people could purchase, is quite universal within photography. I certainly have been toying with the idea for ages, but I always kind of felt a lot of overwhelm. The process of actually making a quality book just seemed to be too much. How would I fund it? How would I get it printed? What was the layout process? All of those things. And then, of course, how would it make any money? But recently I came across a video by a photographer here in the UK called Ed, who has created at least 2 self-funded books which have generated over £15,000 worth in profit. So I thought, this is a man who I think we can learn something from. And he very graciously agreed to spend some time with me. And if you want to get an insight into the process of creating your own photo books and how you can self-fund this and make some profit, then the next sort of 20 minutes or so is going to be absolutely priceless. All right. So we have Ed Thompson here. And thank you, Ed, for joining us. Fantastic to meet you. And so Ed is a British documentary photographer, and his website states he covers environmental issues, subcultures, consequences of war, things of that nature. So quite a broad spectrum. But Ed's also lectured in photography. He's talked at the V&A Museum here in London, the Victoria and Albert, the Photographers Gallery. He speaks regularly on TV, radio, and now, of course, the internet as well. And I first came across Ed when I saw one of his videos about making actual real money from photography books that he'd recorded here in his cellar, I believe, of all places. So today we're going to talk about Ed's journey in self-publishing, with specifically his 2 latest books, which are In Agada da England and When in the Lone Star State. So thank you ever so much for joining us, Ed. And so to begin with, sort of where did the ideas of these books, originally come from?
Well, the funny thing is that, both ideas didn't really begin as books. They began as photo projects. Both books, actually, I mean, In a Garden in England, I started photographing that as a student. So some of the first photos in it I made were in 2002 on a really wacky little folding bellows camera. And I obviously had no idea at that point that it would become like a photo book. I'm just literally learning photography. But the one thing that I did that was very important in the long run was I was very consistent with my medium. So although I was on a little folding square format bellows camera, that's because I love the work of Diane Arbus, but I couldn't afford a twin lens or a Hasselblad. So I was shooting this funny little folding camera, but it was square format, and off I went. And a few years later, then I got a Bronica SQA, and I kept shooting on that. Because I kept making these documentary photo series in mostly Kent, it came to a certain point when I was like, well, I think it was the start of the pandemic actually. I suddenly started looking through all this work, thinking, now there are a few little projects here which they're kind of connected. And I sort of then started going through all the work, and I realized this could be a really good book, literally more than a greatest hits, because the work was interconnected.
The thing that drew me, I think, initially to the video where I watched you talk about the process was that you said, "Oh, look, I actually made some real money from my photography books." And I thought that was unusual because, as you mentioned in your video, a lot of people will tell you that you can't make money. And we'll get on to the
But
specific
yeah,
process.
but they're the publishers, right? They're the
Yeah.
publishers who tell you there's no money in photo books. And that's the thing, is the reason I did those little videos at the start of the year was because I just printed When in the Lone Star State. So my second sort of proper self-published hardback book, and it worked again, and I crowdfunded it and made it. And I just was like, this, it really sucks, right? Imagine if you were a younger photographer, and you're trying to get your work out there, and the publisher's like, we want £20,000 to make your book, and you do the Kickstarter for 20 grand. They literally take all the money, and then they give you 100 copies to sell, and maybe you sell them for 40 quid and you make 4 grand. You've just lost £16,000 essentially. And I know that they've got better distribution, but most of these print runs are pretty small, only 500 copies. You'll sell 500 copies. You'll do it. You will get there, and you'll make some money to then put into future projects and other stuff. The carrot they dangle is, I don't know, it's a little funny carrot, isn't it, Alex? You know about this carrot where they're like, we know people, and
So
then
that's
yeah,
so
it's
that's so there are lots of those little things that they're kind of saying, come with us, and because obviously at the end of that it makes money for them, but really that process that you're
yeah.
sort of going through is it ended up putting quite a substantial amount of money in your own pocket, as you said that then.
Oh, definitely, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I crowd both books. I think I got it wrong actually in the video when I was trying to get the maths off the top of my head, the
Yeah.
previous one. But like with In a Garden at England, I crowdfunded, I think, like 100 and maybe 30 copies.
Mm.
I made it costs it's maybe 7 grand to print. But then if you do the math on like 400, what is it, 370 copies times say 40, I think that's even more than I suggested, which I think was £15,000.
Wow.
Whereas I might have got the maths wrong again. On the spot maths sucks,
It's
doesn't
okay.
it?
This is the
Whereas
photographic eye, not learning
yeah, yeah. Whereas
mathematics.
when in the Lone Star State, it was like I think I only crowdfunded 100 copies for that, so
Mm.
I had 400 copies to sell at 40 quid a pop. Yeah, I had done other hardback books with more mainstream publishers, so I'd been through the process. I'd spent time with like one of the world's top photo book designers, a guy called Ton van der Heijden, part of Heijden Carway kind of studio. They do lots of very amazing books they design. So I went through the process with him. So yes, it did cost a lot of money, but then I had that experience of seeing how he edited, how he sequenced, a little bit about putting dummies together. But the main problem is that until I had that process with a mainstream publisher, I didn't really kind of have as much idea as what to do. And obviously, there's lots of workshops I think people pay for you to go on and whatever. And I think it's Quentin Tarantino said, you want to make a film. The best way of doing it is making a film yourself, like just have a go.
Absolutely.
So I think there's a huge crash course thing. Like I've just put out this thing about making zines. Like zines are a great way of doing a lot of the same process, but it's not as tied to like huge amounts of money. You can print like 100 copies of 50 copies of a zine for like 100 quid.
Mm.
And you're practicing layout, you're practicing color proofing, you're practicing design. So a lot of the skills that would go into a more expensive hardback book you're doing without the stress financially and the pressure, because what if it prints wrong, or what if something goes wrong?
What needs to come first? Do you need to have the outline of the book, so like the broad idea, or the ability to fund it? Because it feels like you mentioned there about that passion, that belief in actually what you want to create. That there are no doubt people out there who probably see this as a fast track to just kind of making some money, get some things and stuff like that. But really, if somebody wants to follow the process that you went through of putting something together that you feel absolutely involved with,
Yeah.
what do you need to do? Is it better to start with the outline of the book to know what it is that you've got, or to sort of gauge?
So I think you've got to start with a project. I taught on a degree like a few years ago in London, and project one, unit one for first year students was make a photo book. And it's just like, wow, like just making the work for the book is like incredibly challenging, let alone the process of making a book as well. So you've got to start with a project. That's my gut instinct is start with the work. Don't
Start with
start
work.
thinking, oh, this will be a book. Because sometimes a project, and at least in my experience, will have a life of its own. And you'll start photographing a project, and before you know it, someone will talk to you. You'll go down a different avenue. Maybe the portrait series you thought was going to be just portraiture, now it becomes a landscape series. Or now, like things will change on you while you make the work. So I think just be guided by the work and know that, what, some of your work's not going to be a big hardback book. It just has a different outcome. It might be a zine. It might be a multimedia piece with some narration. It might lead you to think, well, maybe this should be a documentary film.
So we've got a photographer, and they have a body work, and they're quite, they've got, okay, I've got this project I feel really passionate about something. It's a sizable archive of images. How do they go about taking that broad idea, that huge pool of images, and starting to distill it down into a format that actually suits a book?
Yeah. So the first thing you've got is this giant edit. Now, I've had some commercial jobs where I shoot maybe thousands of photos, and for that, I just dump them all in Lightroom, and I'd use a star rating system in Lightroom to make my kind of first selects, my 5 stars. And if it was just digital, I'd maybe 5-star all, just one big sweep, like the best shots, like whatever shots I'm thinking are amazing. And then I'd do another sweep of say 4 stars. And what I'd do is I'd start editing the 5 stars together. But while I'm trying to sequence those photos, I might think, I'm missing something. I'm missing part of the narrative. I'm missing an image that could play off that photograph. And I'll go back to my 4 stars and think, is anything here? So you never want to get rid of anything. Images can have a habit of like at the last minute jumping into your photo book. Literally, I've done that where photos were not in the book the whole time. At the last minute, I put it in and they become some of people's favorite photos. Runs.
No. Okay. So you got the idea, right? So okay, I've got the project. I want to photograph, whatever that project is. You have an idea about crowdfunding, so you know where this money is going to come from. You've talked about distilling the process. And obviously that idea of actually editing down images and deciding what goes in the book is I think a whole other discussion in
That's a
itself.
nightmare. It is no lie. Sorry, not. If you let someone else edit your work, it's helpful, but it's in a way it's their work. It's their eye. You have a photographic eye, no pun, but you
Mm,
do, and it'll be because of how you see and
mm,
also how you edit. It'll be really important that you edit your work yourself. I think that's really important. I know there's this sort of weird myth where like, oh, photographers can't edit their own work. I totally don't agree, because when you're photographing, you're editing real life. You're doing it right with your camera. But anyway, it's one of those myths I feel that is really perpetuated. But yeah,
all right. So we've got a rough idea of costs, idea of that. So then what are the nuts and bolts of actually crowdfunding? Because I have a feeling that maybe quite a few people who watching this will go, oh, do you know, I really like this idea, but maybe it sounds like I'm begging, or I'm kind of
yeah,
selling
no,
something.
it's tricky, isn't it? Yeah, they call it rewards on Kickstarter, and it all depends how you pitch it, right? I had a friend who, when I crowdfunded the Unseen? Yeah, he did a crowdfunding video for like his darkroom, but he made the mistake of filming it in black and white with like piano music, and it was like, we're a group of artists trying to have an exhibition. It's just like,
Yeah.
that's the wrong tone, man. Because like, yeah, exactly. Like, what are you? You trying to raise money? Like, it's not. You can't. Don't go in that way. I think the way I was going is like, this is something I believe in. The important thing as well is just footage. You're going to
Mm.
have to make a crowdfunding video. And like with my One in the Lone Star State, the Texas book, I didn't have nothing because I shot it in 2006. I literally had no video footage and like 2 photos of me with a camera. So I had to
Mm.
wrangle to put something together, looking through the work, doing those photos, like man
Yeah.
looking through photos for the Kickstarter campaign, whatever. But with Innigarden, England, it was filmed. I photographed it where I lived, pretty much, so I could just walk around and get some more footage. Had some footage when I won an award back in 2014, which I had to film myself walking around. So I had a few bits of footage of me over the years that I could drop in. And obviously for crowdfunding, that's hugely important, because you can take your crowdfunding video and you can make little snippets for Instagram, for Twitter, for TikTok, whatever your social media. You can then use those to funnel people through to the campaign. So I'd say the video is much more important than it used to be. I think my first Kickstarter or Indiegogo, like, hardly anyone watched the video. People backed it without watching the video.
Yeah.
Whereas now it seems like the video is hugely important. So
So with promoting the book, in your video that I originally watched, you do talk about the whole process in a lot more depth than we're covering here. But I think you mentioned way at the beginning that people go, oh, I only have like 100 followers, or it's just a couple hundred people that I know. We're not looking to sell huge amounts of books. What is the best way that you found to promote to a wider audience?
one thing that worked really well, obviously my background was in editorial. So I worked for like magazines as a freelancer for like, I don't know, at least 18 years now. And
Mm.
a lot of the magazines, although they're not going to commission you to like do as many stories or whatever, one thing they are desperate for, and I hate to use the word, I hate to say it, is content. Ugh. But like what will happen is that, I'd approach, say, The Guardian online.
Mm.
They have like a photo series where they promote photographers. Often you'll see it's always tied to a crowdfunding campaign. And obviously I didn't get paid for that. What happened was, for In the Garden of England, the day they posted that article, in one day I raised £1,000, and the next
Wow.
day I raised more as well.
Yeah.
You know,
Now that's you mentioned about there's no grift, there's no blagging. This is not a like a shill or something. You're not raising money just to disappear. So you're raising money to fund, as is crowdfunding, the production of the book. And I think when people are watching this and they kind of go, all right, so you've funded the book itself, you can print the book, and that's great. So it hasn't cost you money. But how do you then actually make money?
right? Well, I spoke to another photographer about this, funny, called Mark Wilson, and he was saying he's like in his 4th edition of Printing the Last Stand. It's a
I have that
series he
book.
did. Yeah, it was great,
I
right?
have
I think I've got the first edition, but he's in like the
Yeah,
fourth, fifth
give it a
edition
swap.
now. And the point is that he's done really well. He's done really well selling it. And I said to him,
Mm.
like, because I was trying to get a distributor, and I've kind of got one at the moment, but it ain't working out very well. Anyway, whatever. But
Yeah.
the point is that the majority of his books, he said, he sells via his website, and I'm the same. And the good news about that is, you have something set up for a commerce on your website. You know what happens? You keep all the money. Yeah.
With all sorts of, it is because so basically there's sort of 3 steps to this process. There is, get the idea, you know, have something solid, tangible that really holds together, that you feel passionate about. Put together a book, you know, an outline of a book. And I know, again, in your video, you went into a bit more process about putting together a, you know, a mock copy and all those sort of things.
Oh yeah, book dummies are huge. Again, if you've
Yeah.
never done it before, my God, make a book dummy, right?
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's all right,
Oh.
Carry on.
If you've never done it before, you've got to make a book dummy. You have to, because it's so, you know, looking it on screen, even exporting it as a PDF and going page by page and looking at the spreads, you cannot understand the difference between this ethereal La La Land and the real world of really holding a book and looking for it, the physical size of it. That's really important. You won't understand that on a computer. And this is where often people mess up self-publishing. Check out the size of your text. If you don't double check it, it will look like a kid's book because the fonts will be huge. It's like error number one I've always seen with students, where they make a photo book and you're like, who's the market for this book? Because the font's quite big. And it's like, yeah, they saw it on the screen, it looked small, and they printed it, and now the font's like is crazy big. So
Yeah. So,
yeah,
so
print
you've got
dummies,
that. Right. So
yeah.
make sure we're not making a children's book. You've got
Yes,
some costs that you know, and you're factoring in a little bit of headroom in there, I'd imagine. Then, you know, you put together that crowdfunding, you know, thing, you raise the money, like you're promoting this idea, and it comes to the day and you get all the printing and you know, do you get like a giant box of books that you then have to send off to
you
people?
do, you do.
Yeah.
But also, first of all, I mean, I went to the printers to oversee the printing because, again, I'm self-publishing, man. It was just me. Thankfully, I've been in that environment before, and it's quite a daunting environment. You're not going into like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory of like Willy Wonka, Oompa Loompas, and colorful rainbows. You're going into like a warehouse with machines in and noise and really horrible lighting. And you've got to try and be like, right, I've got to get familiar. So, yeah, one of the little videos I put out was just literally when I filmed on my smartphone, just to show people, hey, this is what it's like, and this is what I'm doing, proofing. I think that was a really early video before I started the show. It's on a playlist for making a book or a zine. Anyway, it is I'd say very stressful process, and for me a very quick process, because thankfully my wet proofs were so good I didn't have to do many changes to the colors, right? Because once you're in that process, it's all locked in on plates. You'd have to literally remake a plate if you're going to do any major changes, apart from just changing the levels on the offset printing kind of machine, the Heidelberg. Yeah.
There we go. So all this stuff that I think, you know, and you can see why there's that sense of overwhelm, you know, when people get started with this. But at least when you're laying it out like this in this process, it makes it a lot more accessible. That it feels like this is a starting point, and I'm going to get to here, then I'm going to go to there, then I'm going to go to this bit, and that it does have a logical progression. And so, you know, as it was kind of sort of, to use that expression, landing the plane, as it were, which I actually quite like, is if you were to tell someone one thing, if they wanted to publish or self-publish their own photo books, what would be the biggest single piece of advice that you would give them?
It's got to be like the punk rock do-it-yourself ethos, man, because you're going to have to do everything. That's the thing. If you want it to work and actually make money, you got to do everything.
Yeah, outstanding. I think, you know, Ed, it has been fascinating to talk to you about your process and looking. I have to say, you know, when I watched your video originally, it's the sort of photography that is up my street. So I'm kind of like, oh, you know, that helps when you're watching these things. You know, it's fantastic. I hope this has inspired people, guys. If you are interested in seeing Ed, he has a website. I will obviously put it in the video description box below. And as you probably gathered, you can buy his books. so Ed, thank you from your cellar, and thank you from my own little interview studio here. And if you enjoyed that video, then please check out another interview with a fantastic photographer right over here. Thanks ever so much for watching, and I will see you again soon.